Everybody, good morning. Mr. Tinnel here. Today is Tuesday, May 5th, May 19th. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are doing the first part of the civil rights movement. It's going to be a two-part lesson today and Thursday. Kind of looking at the foundations and the beginnings of the movement today, and then getting into just more action and depth on Thursday. Good things. I had a really good dinner last night. Jen and I made some an Asian coleslaw turkey mix stuff. You kind of heat up the turkey and all the ingredients and the coleslaw and some sriracha and soy sauce, and it was really good. It's a really good recipe. I hope you guys are doing well. It's going to be rainy over the next few days, so hopefully you got your indoor activities planned. Getting into what we have today. These next two lessons are, it's kind of a little bit of a heads up warning. There's going to be some tough topics in this. This is a sensitive area. The civil rights movement in the United States happened because a lot of bad things were happening in this country. Terrible things. And people needed to rise up and fix those things. So we're going to start out with looking at some of the bad things that were happening. It's not going to give you warm and fuzzies. It's not going to make you happy. It's probably going to make you mad. That's good. You should watch this and you should see this and say, what was going on? How could these things happen in our country? And no wonder we would have a massive protest movement to fight against these things. So that's what we have going on. We'll jump into this presentation. There are guided notes. There are 10 guided notes for this, 10 questions that go along with it for the 10 topics that we have in this. So starting out, what are civil rights in general? So civil rights are the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. So we're looking at African American civil rights. So in the United States, from the end of the Civil War until the 1960s, African Americans did not have full political and social freedom and equality in the United States. And so in what ways was that equality not seen? That's what we're going to look at in the beginning. Some of the things that questions that we'll answer throughout this: how were African Americans' rights restricted? Do we still see rights restricted today? What are the after effects of these laws? What are the effects of these laws? And do we see effects in other areas of life today, not necessarily in laws? We'll look at those questions today and tomorrow. So starting out, one of the most fundamental parts of the civil rights movement was fighting against segregation. Segregation was the division of races in open spaces. So you could have, as this picture shows, black water fountains and white water fountains, black parts of restaurants and white parts of restaurants, black parts of buses and white parts of buses. So where does segregation come from? Segregation comes from this court case called Plessy versus Ferguson. So Homer Plessy was a black man who was trying to get a train ticket. He wanted a ride on this train. There was a white section and a black section. He was a black man, and he was told that the black section was sold out. Well, he said, okay, well, the black section sold out, then just buy me, I'll take a white ticket. That's you have seats on the train still available. I want a seat on the train. And they refused to sell him a ticket. So think about this. You have the white section of the train and the black section of the train. Black section of the train is full. There's a seat in the white section, but they would not sell him a ticket. So the train's argument was, no, we didn't refuse to sell you a ticket. We said your section of the train was full. Homer Plessy's argument was, no, you had a seat available and you refused to sell it to me. So he sues. Lawsuit goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says segregation is okay. This is one of the 3 big court cases that the Supreme Court has gotten wrong. This court case was wrong. The Supreme Court messed up. They said that it is okay to have a black section and a white section. It is okay to have segregation as long as it is equal. Equal. That's the big problem here, is how do you determine what equal is? If you are separating something, it's not likely that it's going to be equal. It's going to be unbalanced. So the Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson says you can have separate facilities as long as they're equal. What we're going to see throughout American history from this is the early 1900s until the 1960s, segregation separates races, but it does not make them equal. When you separate races like this, you get an imbalance, whether it's water fountains or restaurants or schools or public services, parks. This division separates us even more. There are a lot of video links in this today. Those are supplemental. Some of them are really, really important though, and I'll touch on those as we go through. This is Homer Plessy. So we start seeing this division of segregation. Different entrances for African Americans than whites. Businesses choosing to who they can service. So the civil rights movement begins with this as a political, legal, social struggle to gain full citizenship rights for African Americans. This introductory video is very good. It's about 5 minutes long. It gives you a good introduction to the entire movement. Segregation, we already talked about, is this separation of African Americans and whites. These were enforced by Jim Crow laws in the South that we had talked about before. You see some state-by-state examples in there. Disenfranchisement and the taking of rights. How were rights taken specifically in voting? We saw that through literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, white primaries. These are things that we discussed before, especially with the literacy tests. I think the literacy tests. We looked at these before. If you want to take some time and look through the literacy tests again, you can. So lynching is a really sensitive area. Lynching was a public execution of a person by a mob of people. Typically, during this time period, an African American was killed by a mob of white people. These are 2 videos. I think, so this video is free. You can watch this one. This one you have to sign up for a CBS trial, so you probably can't watch that. But this is a really good explanation as to what the history of lynching was in the United States, and this museum that was built in memory of the lynching victims in the South throughout the after the Civil War to the 1960s. There was a period in the United States where African Americans were killed and nothing was done. And that's just a matter of fact. It's not a controversial statement. At this museum, documents at least 4,000 people who were killed and nothing was done about it for crazy reasons. Everyone, so all of these pillars that are hanging, it has their names, where they were from, where they were killed, and why they were killed. It's a very dark moment in American history. And the end of this lesson today really kind of hits rock bottom in regards to lynching and these troubled times in the United States. As we saw, those are the rest of the literacy tests. We continue to see segregation in the North also. So we started seeing housing restrictions. If you lived, so this is a thing, this map here is called redlining. It happened in the North, but it also happened in the South. Redlining is when the cities were segregated, or black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. So you might say to yourself, well, why are there black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods? Redlining, this process, this map that you're looking at, is why there are black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. If you lived in a red area, you could not get a loan to buy a new house. So you had to live in that redlined area. You were stuck in that area. Because let's say, all right, so A is the best in this map. So A is the best right here. I live in this red area. I want to get a loan to buy in that green area. When I go to the bank and say, all right, here's my job, here's all my money, I can do this, the banks would say, all right, well, where do you live? I'd say, well, I live in this area. They would say, well, sorry, you're too much of a risk. You're too much of a risk because you live in this area. Well, if you start looking at the statistics, who lives in that area? Poor working class people and African Americans. Those people were prevented from bettering their lives because of banks saying, we're not going to give you a loan. This further divided cities. This created neighborhoods that got stuck. You couldn't increase the value of the neighborhood. People couldn't move out so that, better people could move in and then lift the neighborhoods up. Everyone gets stuck in the neighborhoods. So not only that, you get a racial divide in these neighborhoods. Because some of these redline neighborhoods actually weren't bad. There were predominantly African-American neighborhoods in some cities that were wealthy, but they were still considered redline because they were African-American. So it's interesting to see how segregated cities is kind of a creation. That because loans wouldn't be given to certain people, we didn't see the integration that was possible. That happens in the North. A lot of the things that we see, like lynching, a lot of the lynching and things like that happens in the South. Some of it happens in the North. Most of it happens in the South. But the act of redlining and the segregation of cities, that happens throughout the country. Okay, so early civil rights leaders, we see W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the founder of the NAACP. Some of you may have did your research paper on him a few months ago. And we also see Booker T. Washington, the founder of the Tuskegee Institute. Two fundamental groups in helping African Americans in the civil rights movement. So a major change in segregation in the United States happens with Brown versus the Board of Education. So the Supreme Court here's a case arguing that separate educational facilities cannot be equal. Thurgood Marshall, famous lawyer for the NAACP, who will later become the first African-American Supreme Court justice, argues that separate is inherently unequal. If you separate things, they become unequal. You can only have equality if things are balanced and together. So Brown versus Board of Education was saying that there's inequality between black schools and white schools, because that's where we saw segregation. We saw black schools and white schools. Thurgood Marshall said, we shouldn't have black schools and white schools. We should have integrated schools. The only way we can have equal education is if we have black students and white students together. So the Supreme Court says schools must unanimously, the Supreme Court unanimously decided that schools must desegregate. Schools must work to integrate. This Dull Study video is a really deep psychological experiment. Some of you may have seen it before. It's a pretty heavy and sad video, but it is interesting and it is worth watching. And then the Brown versus Board of Education overview is also very good. We start to see challenges to the Brown versus Board of Education decision. People starting to work to see if they can actually integrate schools. And one of the first groups to do that was the Little Rock Nine. So Little Rock Nine was 9 African-American high school students that were admitted to Little Rock High School, Central High School in Little Rock. The governor of Arkansas said they could not attend school. The governor said they couldn't go to school. So in return, President Eisenhower sent in National Guard troops to escort the students to the school. This footage is really crazy. It's really interesting though. Soldiers came in to help students go to class. It's craziness. See mobs following them on their way to school. Crazy scenes. I really suggest watching that video clip. We also saw the increase of Ku Klux Klan during this time. It was starting to gain popularity again in the 1950s and 1960s. This included intimidation tactics and lynching, like we discussed before. And see a link here to looking at some information on Klan's evidence in North Carolina. Sad dark times. A few more topics real quick. Looking at school desegregation, we start seeing a problem where cities have schools that are open to everyone. But if you have a school in a black neighborhood and a school in a white neighborhood, and they're community schools, they're neighborhood schools, you know, the areas around them are where the students come from. So you have a school in a black neighborhood and a school in a white neighborhood. Well, what's the racial makeup of those schools going to be? Well, if it's a school in a black neighborhood, it's going to be a black school. If it's a school in a white neighborhood, it's going to be a white school. So Swan versus Charlotte says, well, this isn't fair. This isn't fair that these schools are not being integrated. We need to do more to integrate these schools. So Swan versus Charlotte is a court case that said you can forcefully integrate schools through whatever means possible, including busing. So basically, if you live in a black neighborhood, you can have the opportunity to go to a white school to balance out that racial population. Same with the black school. White kids can go to black schools and balance out that racial population, because they really shouldn't be black schools and white schools. They should be schools that are integrated, that might be in a certain neighborhood. But Swan versus Charlotte, that case spreads throughout the country, and it's still used today. It's still used in Charlotte today. Students can be bused from different neighborhoods across the city to different schools to balance out populations. Busing was a very controversial thing. It is still a very controversial thing. And lastly, we see Emmett Till. So this is a sad, downer, really disturbing story that we're going to end today's lesson on, because this is a spark that frustrates so many people, that really puts this movement into action. And that's what we're going to see on Thursday. So Emmett Till was a 14-year-old young man visiting from Chicago. He had come down to visit his family in Money, Mississippi. And this is, deep in the South. Emmett supposedly goes to, he goes to a local convenience store and supposedly whistles at a white cashier. Now, it has come out, I think last year, on this woman's deathbed, she said he didn't actually even do this. This was a made-up story. Basically, the story was made up so that he could be killed. So this white woman's boyfriend and his friend go to Emmett Till's family's house. They say, "Oh, well, we need to take Emmett. We need to just take it for a ride, teach him a lesson real quick." So his uncle lets him go. You got 2 armed guys at your door. What are you going to do? So they take Emmett Till, and these 2 men brutally murder him. Just unspeakable things were done to this young man. He just the worst things you can imagine. He's tied to a cotton gin and thrown to the bottom of a river after he was killed. He ended up being found a few days later. They arrest these 2 men. These 2 men go to trial in Mississippi, and they are found innocent. With all the evidence around them, they are found innocent. A few days later, they do a radio interview. They admitted to this murder on the radio, and nothing was done. 2 men murder a 14-year-old boy, admit to it, and nothing was done. This is why the civil rights movement was happening. This is why there were protests and marches and fights for justice and equality, because 14-year-old boys were being killed and there were no repercussions. It was craziness, absolute craziness. This sets a spark off in the United States. Emmett Till's mother comes, gets Emmett's body, takes him back up to Chicago, and she has an open casket funeral for Emmett. Like I said, I'm not going to get into all the things that were done to him, but his body was in terrible condition, horrifying condition, and she gave him an open casket funeral. So why? Why would she give her horrifically beaten up son an open casket funeral? His face was just, you can look it up. I'm not going to show any pictures of it. He didn't look real. his body was beaten up so bad. Why would she do that? Why would she show everybody in America that? Because she wanted America to see what racism did to her son. She wanted America to see this is what's happening in our country. 14-year-old boys are being killed for no reason without any justice. That's why she had an open casket funeral. And like I said, this sets off most of the stuff that we see on Thursday. This is going to set off so much more of the civil rights movement. So that is all we have for the day. Thank you all. Thank you for filling out your Cold War Lightbox. If you haven't done that, make sure you go back and turn that in. I'll start grading those today. And that's all I have. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye.